So now let's dive into the communication piece. So again, kind of two pieces here, the communication with the cross-functional teams, and then we'll get into the data in a little bit. I want to break down a little bit around communication structure, which might sound a little silly, but when we're looking at communicating, there's a particular structure that happens. And this first part is identifying the gaps in our communication, which I learned from motivational interviewing, which is a process and a methodology in psychology to help people who have challenges with substance abuse, get them motivated internally to get them to move forward and make progress. And so this is where this framework comes from. So if we're thinking about the structure of communication, the first piece we have is what we mean, what we really mean in our hearts. But the gap is between what we mean and then what we say. Anyone ever have that feeling of like, I don't have the words, or my brain no worky today, right? Like there's that gap. And sometimes we just have the feeling, but the feeling is so much that the words are very difficult to place. So there's a bunch of reasons why this gap happens, but there's this gap. Gap number one. Second gap is between what we say and what the other person hears. So many reasons. Environmental, it's too loud. Someone's playing Gwen Stefani way too loud. I'm feeling overwhelmed and I can't really hear you right now. The other person's kind of whispering and I can't really pull everything that they say. But there's so many reasons why that gap occurs. And then the final gap is between what we hear and then what we understand of it, what we comprehend. So if I ask everyone, what does trust mean? We're going to get different answers. So there's all these gaps in one line of communication where we can miss one another. And so our goal is really to understand what the person means. That's what we're trying to really go for, okay? So these are all the gaps in just one line of a communication. Now let's take it a little bit bigger than that. Let's talk about group communication. So I show you like lines of communication. I got this from a woman named Rebecca Courtney from AJ and Smart, an amazing design agency. So it's a really great visual of group communication. So 2 people, 1 line. 3 people, 3 lines. 4 people, 6 lines. 5 people, 10 lines. 8 people, 15 lines. 7 people, 21 lines. 8 people, 28 lines. 9 people, 36 lines. 10 people, 45 lines of communication. Group communication is a lot more complex than people give it credit for. There's a lot going on. And so think about in one line of communication, all the gaps that could occur, multiply that by the amount of people that we're trying to communicate with. Dang, it's a lot, right? A lot of plates up in the air. So I just want you to keep that in mind when you're thinking about group communication. Next piece here is I want to go into group biases. Has anyone heard of group biases before? Okay, a couple people. Basically, it's the challenges that we have in communication and decision making as a group. And these are like the common challenges that we have. So in this, I'm going to tap into 3 ones that I see all the time that happen with cross-functional teams. So the first one here is the overconfidence bias. This is kind of hitting to what I was saying earlier, where we overestimate our ability to handle multiple things at once and do them well. And a common spot for that is traditional brainstorming, right? Where there's a group of people, one person says something, and then another person saying something, and then third person saying something else, but I'm still trying to understand what they said. I wasn't really clear on what they said. I'm trying to process my own thoughts about it. It gets very chaotic. And so we overestimate our ability to handle those 45 lines of communication well. And there's even some research that's showing that group brainstorming has been found to be less effective than individual brainstorming, which we'll dive into a little bit later. Second one, the IKEA effect. Has anyone ever heard of the IKEA effect? I just love the name because we all know IKEA, and then it makes sense. It's we place higher value on the things we created ourselves. So a simple example might be our ideas. But it's my idea. It's the best idea. My baby is the best baby, right? Or it might be our systems, the ways in which we work. Or it could be our ways of communicating. Why did you email me? You should have called me for that. Oh, this meeting could have been an email. So we hold very tightly to the things that we created ourselves, which then limits our ability to listen and be understanding of others' ideas, right? So it's stifling the creativity when this is happening. Third one, in-group bias. Anyone heard of this? Okay, it'll sound familiar though. When we feel a stronger connection to our group and view others as outsiders, right? So this is where the us versus them dynamic occurs. I think many of us have seen this one quite a bit. I remember, so in grad school, this was the first bias I was introduced to. And I was asked to do a whole presentation to my cohort, and there's like 15 of us. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it a little differently. And I split up my cohort into 2 groups. And it was a game about how do we create world peace, with the layer of me explaining how us versus them dynamics occur. Because people who have particular values see others who have a different value as threats. Because if they're right, then that means I'm wrong. But I can't be wrong. I'm right. They have to be wrong. So I'm teaching them this, but as they're doing it, I'm also poking them a little bit. Nope, that's a bad idea. Their idea was better. Oh, no. What they were saying was right. After just a couple of minutes, they started arguing with each other. As they're talking about world peace, as I'm explaining how this happens, my professor comes up to me, whispers in my ear, and says, keep pushing them. Like, it was just so apparent. So it's very easy to see these things once you understand them out when cross-functional teams are working together. So knowing these type of biases can help us combat them in a way. So the next piece, before that, I want to share a couple examples. So there's common ones of like sales versus marketing, engineers versus designers. This one might be a little bit much for people, but crunchy peanut butter versus smooth. I'm crunchy. Any smooths? I hope we can still be friends, okay? But it's very easy for those us versus them dynamics to occur in so many ways. And so how do we create more of an inclusive communication for our cross-functional teams? How do we get them to really come together? Well, there's a bunch of different ways. But one of the biggest ways, kind of big picture, that I think is very helpful to create that inclusive communication is by providing structure. Instead of just letting it be open-ended, putting in things in place for how we actually work together. And I'll show you some examples. But when we do this, what I found personally is it reduces the group biases. Everyone is heard and considered. And with the considered piece, I want to say, like, everyone is heard, and I think that's a very common thing in our culture, right? Make sure we're heard. I think people also want to be considered, meaning you heard what I said, but did you actually think about what I said? Did you chew on what I said? Right? So getting that, not just heard, but also considered, increases the productivity and fosters a cohesive environment. And again, those are just 3 biases. I think there's something like over 100 that are pretty common. So the first bit of structure that I like to use in all the teams that I work with is working together alone. Has anyone heard of that? Okay, cool. So this is where we give people time, let's say 3 to 5 minutes, to write down their ideas on whatever it is we're talking about. And then from there, we have them bring their ideas to the group. I remember when I first discovered this was kind of like on my own. I was working at the residential facility, and our groups, our clients did not like our groups. They would go to the bathroom for 45 minutes to not go to group. They would put their heads down. They were totally disengaged. And there were a lot of people who were very introverted, right? So they didn't really feel comfortable speaking up. So I found this exercise called round robin. It's very simple. You have one piece, each person has a piece of paper. Up top, you write a challenge that you have, and then you take the paper and you pass it to the person to the right. They then write a solution. And then you pass it to the next, and they write a solution. You go all around the circle until you get your paper back. When I did this at the facility, the introverts were the most stoked about it. They're like, this is amazing. Like, no one's telling me what to do, but I can like receive people's ideas. It's really easy for me to like consider what people want me to do. I get to choose what I want to do. And then everyone else was really excited because they were able to provide value to others. So this is where I got a first sense of like the idea of working together alone. And now I do that with teams all the time. Next piece is note and vote. Very much what it sounds like. So we take what we wrote, we visualize it, and we put it up on a wall, and then we give people time to vote. So I like to give between 1 to 5 votes, depending on what it is. And the nice thing about that is now we're focusing on which idea to move forward with. How many times have you seen where someone has an idea and then someone immediately goes, that won't work, that's a bad idea, that's dumb. It shuts people down, it kills creativity. With this, we put up all the ideas are heard and considered because you're like, which one do I really want to move forward with? And then we'll have our top 3 or 4 ideas that the team wants to move forward with, rather than shutting down a bunch of people's ideas. So the focus is something different. So it looks a little bit like this. Everyone has all their ideas, and now we have a very structured way of looking at the ideas, and again, heard and considered. And then this one you probably all know, time boxing. I find it very helpful. So give people a certain amount of time to work on whatever it is that we're working on. And it keeps people very focused. There's a nice sense of pacing. Okay, we know what we're going to do now. We know what we're going to do next. And there's this thing called Parkinson's law. So work is expanded to the time available for its completion. I don't think it's a law, just from my perspective, because if I give you 5 minutes to write a business proposal, probably won't be able to do it well. But the general idea is, okay, we don't have to give things so much time. We can give it a reasonable amount of time and put that time in